Welcome to Blind Man and the Elephant. These are your hosts, Neeraj and Osho.
This is a podcast where two friends discuss a whole host of ideas that range from across the spectrum, from economics to culture, politics to sport. And we hope to bring our fresh perspective to things that are happening around us.
We live in times where there is an information overload. So, this is our attempt to make some sense of the noise.
You can listen to us on all major podcast streaming apps, including Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, and Anchor, as well as, of course, YouTube. You can check out all our links in the description along with this episode.
Hi guys, welcome to part 2 of our episode with Tanvi. In part 1, we actually discussed a whole bunch of things with Tanvi. We discussed her background, how she got into mental health, how she sort of made those linkages with yoga, what that means with a very, very quick biology lesson, which we found extremely helpful to listen to. And I hope that you guys would as well. If you haven't checked that episode out, please go check it out on our channel. We are available across all platforms. And while you're there, please hit the like, share, comment buttons. Please keep giving us your feedback. Every single word is very, very important to us. So, without further ado, we start part 2 of our episode with Tanvi. Here goes. How would you recommend that people start thinking about their mental health, in the sense that what are, say, the three things that you suggest to someone when you said they're having like you suggested they have their daily or weekly check-ins? What are those few things that they must ask themselves, or they should sort of prod their own minds towards, for them to take that sort of mental health check?
I'm afraid that my answer might make it sound very simplistic because there's so much more to it than what might come across, but I'll try my best to answer that question. Um, I think that if we have it within us at that time, but to really sort of make an earnest attempt at it anyway, to ask these questions such as what are the dominant messages that are being put out into the world, that are being broadcast into the world about how one should be, or what is the right way of living and doing things. That's a very important question. I think that we all need to start asking ourselves, and maybe in order to create spaces for some sort of destigmatization, um, for conversations on mental health, to be able to create spaces for that, this is one question that is crucial. In addition to that, maybe also asking what are the systems of oppression that are extremely powerful and um, that are putting out these messages. So maybe realizing that these messages are coming from somewhere, pointing that out, figuring out where these messages are coming from, and why it might be in their interest to put these messages out. How is it furthering their agenda? And how is that affecting us at a very personal level?
Tani, sorry, can you give an example for that?
The first example that comes to mind is maybe whilst talking about women, right? Thinking of what are the adjectives that you associate with women. Something that comes up is being pretty or being beautiful. And what does that involve? Your beauty companies will put out stuff like fair and lovely, right? So, fair is a good thing, lovely is a good thing. And that's just sort of so driven into our being that everyone grows up wanting to be fair and lovely. And that's some, can we take ourselves away from that idea of wanting to be fair and lovely through the use of this beauty cream? So capitalism really sort of driving its agenda further, saying, hey, you use this beauty cream and then you will be woman enough or a good enough woman, so um, realizing that these messages are being put out. So of course, for people with a darker skin tone, they're disadvantaged right from birth, and then this sort of futile attempt at becoming a beautiful woman is impacting their mental health. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm. So just sort of questioning ourselves with respect to how we cannot really see our mental health problems in isolation from larger systems that exist all around us and are really functioning in full power at all times. That could be something that we can all do. um, and I was just speaking to my parents yesterday about how, the more we know, the harder it is to be tolerant towards a lot of things. And unfortunately, it is distressing to us the more we know, right? Things around us become distressing to us. um, but I think that's something that we'll probably become okay with eventually, because all this discomfort is just a sign of understanding things better. And then the coping strategies around it will come up eventually, because we do have systems around us who are also there to support and work around it, to build resistance in ways that are helpful. So accessing these systems becomes the next step once you do that inquiry and understand the process and what mental health is as a complex term in a sort of more comprehensive sense.
Okay, I don't know how to put this exactly. When you were saying that there are sort of things outside yourself which have a large impact on your mental health, and that you have to recognize where you are at in terms of your mental health, is there a phenomenon where these things become rationalizations for people where it's used as a crutch? Where I'm coming from is because, like, a lot of times you see people use mental health terms or even just generally their casual social commentary in a very sort of flippant way, you know?
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense to me. And could you just give me an example of, maybe like a little more concrete example of how
So
this might be misused?
yeah, so Tanvi, like a few things that come to my mind are where people say, "Oh, I'm feeling depressed." Like, I think depression is obviously like a diagnosed mental issue, as far as I understand, and I may be wrong here. But or if not depression, then how people say, "Oh, I'm very OCD about this," but all that might mean is that they're
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
just
Hmm.
organized.
So how this can sort of um, derail actual mental health related conversation.
That at a larger level, probably, but also just how when you are confronting yourself, are you using these things as an easy crutch or an easy explanation for you to just sort of, I don't know, maybe um, still hide some parts of yourself or not confront some aspects of yourself, like remote amounts of self-doubt, and people say I have an imposter syndrome, or yeah, as in these are just things that I've seen happen in the last 2 3 years, where within some section of people, given the fact that mental health conversations have reached the place that they have in those communities, it's sometimes going beyond where probably it should be. Or am I sounding too boomer?
No, to me, you don't sound too boomer. And yeah, I think that whilst I don't want to sort of diss anyone's experience of their day to day existence, I do understand that not realizing when to use certain terms might be very misleading to yourself. And then that itself will determine the actions that you take professionally, personally as well. So we're sort of creating these stories of ourselves as we go, and based on the meaning that we make of those stories, we take certain actions. And of course, saying that I am OCD is probably going to reinforce certain things and allow ourselves some freedom probably from other things. Or saying imposter syndrome, absolutely. So all of these things, I don't think should be used lightly. But at the same time, and I wish that there was an easier way around this, but I think that really recognizing our privilege is a great starting point for people who are able to use such terms very freely. There is so much information available, so much incredibly like empirically tested, so many studies, so much theory around what it is and what mental health is and what all that involves. The nuance is all available. So recognizing your privilege and being accountable. So I think with understanding privilege, there also can be a lot of guilt, and to work with that guilt and realize that what we want to do is be accountable rather than constantly feel guilty. And as I say all this, I realize that uh, I may not necessarily be answering this question in a very straightforward manner because that's how it is in my head as well. It's largely muddled up.
On the privilege part, I just wanted to know how is it that that guilt can be constructively channeled? Because you can either be bogged down by it and blame every action that you take, be it drive a car and give out like carbon emissions, or just exist by being a man in this world. I don't know. There can be a lot of ways in which when you think about privilege, it can make you feel negative emotions. So how do you be at peace with that? Because that's eventually what you have to do, because you're on a sliding scale of privilege. Everyone is.
I wonder, is this like a counseling sort of session? Maybe not for you, but like the audience at large. That's
What I'm trying to say is that I don't think there is a generally accepted way in which conversations of privilege are happening, in that this guilt often takes over every conversation. It's either you having that guilt or somebody imposing that guilt on you. And in that conversation, I think people aren't able to really come around to the fact that privilege in some form is going to be there. And how do you then deal with it? Because you're not going to like have a miraculously equal society tomorrow. So, how do you deal with it at a more personal level in every interaction that you have, including when you're talking about the world at large?
with respect to privilege, I would say that the guilt that tends to arise with an understanding of our privilege is not something that we can sort of suppress and say that, like you said, we're not going to be miraculously born into a very equal society the next day. So that's not something that we essentially really have to work with that guilt. And my number one recommendation for working with that guilt, if that is sort of really bogging you down and affecting work and personal relationships chronically, could be to seek professional help. And I would want it to be a nicer response, I guess. But like with physical health, the second we have some sort of an impairment, we're happy to go see a doctor. So here too, I would say that if the guilt is so severe that you're not able to go about um, functioning in your daily tasks, that's something that you should definitely do and seek a professional's sort of maybe support. And whilst that is important, in order to at least be able to address our own privilege, to if that's obviously in your interest, that is right, because I think a lot of people are also very okay with being in that state. Um, they they would want to complain about it, and that's for them, that works for them to be able to vent to whoever's listening and continue to complain but not necessarily take action. So if that works for you, great. But if not, if you actually want to make change, then to be able to um, own up to where you are and do the work that is necessary. The work involves actively reaching out to groups that would allow you to be more informed, allow you to understand that privilege is something that you are also born into, right? There are a bunch of stories that we're born into, and that's not necessarily something that we can change very easily. But how can we work with that? And also, very importantly, how can we be gentle with ourselves in that process? And um, you also did speak of a bunch of people who are far too easy on themselves. But to be honest, that works for them. That works for them. So, like the section of people who are happy with just venting and complaining and not doing anything, these people who are oblivious are going to continue to be oblivious. So the only question is about those who are willing to make that change. And what you can do to make that change is to just be proactive about it. Reach out to a professional, reach out to a friend who might know a little bit more about mental health, a relative. It doesn't have to be a family member, and talk about where you are with respect to your own mental health. And you know try and look for conversations where you can learn more about what can be done, because I think self-awareness, like you said, Osho, some time ago, is really key, is your starting point into understanding and working with that guilt that comes up due to the privilege that you have. Is that answering the question?
I think that does answer the question. And just to be on the flip side of how Osho thinks, and I think this is somewhere where we think a bit differently as well. What's the other side of this equation like? In the sense that how do you know how to respond to someone else's needs, right? Like Osho touched upon the fact that sometimes people may have needs which they don't actually have, and that kind of thing, and they come from a place of privilege or that sort of thought process. But my question is more around how do you identify your friends, your family members, your loved ones who are going through a tough time? And I mean, again, I completely understand that it's super individualistic and might differ from case to case, but what are, say, the few like top few signs to look out for? What are the few sort of first steps to sort of take towards that? Because while I know that a lot of people might be sensitive towards this, I also feel like more than our generation, even our parents' generation and so on, like sometimes they may want to help, but they don't necessarily know how to. So how do we sort of start on that path?
Thank you so much, Neeraj, for that question. I think this podcast episode would have been incomplete, I think, without it, because that's what we're all also trying to do, right? Like, reach out to people in hopes that they may be able to be there for us the way that we need them to be. And maybe a number one suggestion, or one of the things, the top things that people can do in order to be there for someone is obviously, there is some amount of concern that they may have for this person's well being. So if you notice that there is someone who is presenting themselves and saying, hey, I would like to have a conversation, something's on my mind, this has been on my mind for a while, this is bothering me, so whenever these sort of statements come up, or they say, can I do a call with you about nothing in particular, I just want to have a chat. So if we have it within us at that time, can we really make it known that we are available for them? So, say if we're having a conversation in person and someone comes up to me and says, can I talk to you for 10 minutes about something that's been on my mind? And, I'm typing away on my laptop, but also nodding my head and saying, yes, absolutely, of course. And like, I'm working. So I'm clearly not paying attention. And this might be very simple, but it's a thing that a lot of us tend to do. We're in this age of multitasking and saying that, yes, yes, I'm absolutely listening to you. I'm here for you. But I'm also checking my phone. I'm also showing impatience in some way or another. And this is a very sensitive thing. So maybe they really want our attention at that time. So to really make it explicitly known that we're there, we're listening to them, is some like a great starting point, I feel. And then further, to actually listen instead of saying what we think it is that they need, right? Because um, I have to give this example. When maybe a few years ago I was speaking to a friend, and he was telling me about something that was particularly distressing for him, and I care about this person. So I was very quick to say, you know what, maybe you should do this. And I really think that this might help you. This might lessen the pain. Or I was just jumping to give solutions. And um, he's a psychotherapist as well. And he sort of stops me mid sentence and says, hey, look, I know that you care about the fact that this is causing me distress and you want me to get out of it as soon as possible. But right now, what I need is for you to just listen, and something as simple as that, to check in and say, what is it that I can do for you? Do you want some practical help with this? Do you just need um, someone to vent to? What is it that you need? And all of these things sound so simple, right? But often when it comes to actually having to practice it, we might not be doing it as clearly and as um, affectionately as we might want to. And these things sort of stand out. So actually just really making yourself available and being there for that person in the capacity that of course you can be in and that they would want. So that balance. And finally, I can also think of maybe following up on that conversation. If someone has something where they're somehow being vulnerable to you, it's not easy to be vulnerable to someone, even if it's your closest friend, even if it's someone, like a counselor. you're I don't have a problem in going to a doctor and saying, hey, look, I have a broken bone or I have a cold or something like that. But talking about something that is so dear to you, of course, due to the stigma, been has become really difficult. If at any point it wasn't difficult, I wouldn't know about that. But it's very difficult to be vulnerable. And then if someone has the courage to do that, to be there and follow up on it in maybe 10 days time or even sooner, just to say, how are you today, or knowing this person and then sending them a joke, just starting a conversation, showing that your presence is a part of their life and that you care. So to not just have that 1 5 minute or 1 hour conversation, but to really make it known that I see that you're going through a distressing time, and if you need me to do something which I can do, I'm happy to be there for you.
Thanks, Tanvi. I think that really sums it up. I think just a small addition to this question is this is well and good, and it makes a lot of sense if you yourself are in a good place. But what if I find myself in a slightly precarious position where maybe I'm suffering with some kind of mental health issues and anxiety of my own, and well, someone requires me to be there for them. And this would be a struggle, right? Because assuming that this is someone that's close to us, we would not want to obviously give up on them, but at the same time, what if I'm not in a position to help someone else because I need some kind of help myself? What is one to do in that situation?
Yeah, a very, very realistic question, because this is happening so much more than, people just being there and being 100% available for someone in distress. That's not usually the case. I guess as professionals, we are able to, you know, disconnect from our personal struggles when a client comes in. But if you're being there for someone in your personal circles, it's completely different. Uh, Not really able to put aside things that you're going through and address this person's need and be there for them 100%, which is very common. So in that case, I think, again, I think my favorite word maybe of all time is, of favorite term is like self-awareness. So if we're able to work on cultivating some amount of understanding towards what our state is in that time, and then realizing that self-care is essential. So cliched phrases, but you can't fill a glass with water if you yourself are an empty pot. And I'm saying, I'm just like destroying this, but essentially you can't give what you don't have. So which is why I always say, if we have it in ourselves at the time, in a capacity that we are comfortable with. So first knowing where you stand, and in order to work towards being in a space where you can give to someone in times of distress, it's crucial to prioritize self care. And self care can be anything. It can be sitting with a cup of chai every morning and looking out at my plants, realizing that that sort of sets the tone of the day for me. That gives me some amount of energy boost. Or using 5 minute breaks during the workday to watch like a comedy video that just makes me laugh, allows me to disconnect, even if for those 5 minutes, from the work that was, taking up a lot of my mind space just before that. Talking to a friend, um, doing some activity that you really enjoy, so engaging in these sort of coping strategies that are very personal to you. And it need not be that someone saying, oh, I cooked this incredible biryani today and look at me making all these 5-star dishes, so you forcing yourself to go in the kitchen and toil and do something in the hopes that it'll make you happy, but rather sticking to what works for you and engaging in that very actively in order to be there for someone if they need it, as well as, or rather more importantly, in order to help yourself.
I can't tell you how refreshing it is to pick someone's brain about everyone's brain. Like, it's really interesting how everybody is just differently wired, and we're all trying to navigate that. And obviously, you're doing a great job in helping everyone do that. So, thanks, Tanvi, for this entire chat. Do you have any sort of parting thoughts or recommendations that you want to give to our listeners?
Thank you, Osho. You guys have been so sweet. And yeah, I remember even in figuring out how we're going to go about doing this podcast episode and when we're going to do it, etc. There were some conversations around cynicism and, just having our own personal opinions with respect to some things that we might not be very familiar with. And I think that that's a great way to approach things. And, just the experience should be the final determinant as to like whether we want to take that forward or not. So I really hope that our conversation today has probably just piqued your interest a little bit more into mental health, into adjunctive therapies to psychotherapy with respect to mental health, one of which is yoga. And with respect to the final thoughts that I might want to leave you guys with, I would I would say that um, you know see what it is that you as a listener want to achieve. Like, what is your temporary end goal at this point of time with respect to your own being more holistically, just not just physically, but with respect to what is important to you. Is professional development and achieving certain professional goals important to you? Is our relationships, certain relationships in your life, important to you? So just sort of being able to prioritize a little bit, and in that prioritizing yourself really, and in doing so figuring where you are with respect to your mental health and reaching out accordingly. I cannot uh, promote reaching out enough, because it doesn't have to be, like I said, with it doesn't have to be reaching out to your partner or to a parent or to a sibling just because they've known you, if that's not who you're comfortable with. To even say, I've had this just one conversation with this individual, but I really think that they might be someone I can reach out to with something that's on my mind, and being able to follow up on it. Because at the end of the day, we're all sort of trying to navigate around all these things that we all have going on, and there's so much complexity to it. So, if we can make it a little easier on ourselves by allowing someone to somehow support us in sharing that burden, why not, right? And again, I'm just recommending seeking professional help. There are a lot of helplines. Project Mumbai itself has a helpline, and I'm going to use this as a way to do a shameless plug. But we have a helpline called Samvad, and it's available 7 days a week in English, Hindi, and Marathi from 8 in the morning to 8 at night. Available for anyone having thoughts around uncertainty, anxiety, stress, depression, or anything else that might be on your mind with respect to mental health. So talking to a professional counselor can do wonders. And I don't know if I mentioned it, it's free of cost. So a lot of people have worries around, spending for therapy, and this would be a good starting point to understand your own mental health a little better. So just reaching out to this helpline would also be a good starting point, or any other helpline, anything that works for you. And I think that's more than just one thought or a couple of thoughts. So I'll probably stop now.
Thanks, Tanvi, for that. I think it's very important, and it's great that you've sort of laid out means with which people, at least in Mumbai and India, can reach out and seek some of that help. And overall, I think this has got to be one of our best episodes, just by the amount of content that has flown through, and by the amount of well researched points that have come out. I can only hope and aspire that the rest of our stories follow this trajectory. And so, thank you so much for that. And thank you again for also sharing so many stories that are super personal to you and close to your heart. I think that really added a lot of color to today's episode. So, yeah, thank you so much. I don't know if there are any other concluding thoughts from you, Osho, but otherwise, we can end today's episode.
Yeah, thanks, Tanvi. This has been lovely. We can keep
Thank you
going on
guys.
and on about how amazing this was.
Thank you. Thank both of you so much because not just has it been a really good time that I've had over the last hour or so talking to you guys about things that I guess matter to us all quite a bit, but at the same time, just to be able to give me a platform to talk about things that I think are very important. And doing it in such a fun, conversational manner is not something I've had an opportunity to do in a while. So, yeah, thank you for that. It's been so good.
Thanks, Tanvi. Okay, that was episode 7 from our end. Please like, please share, and please subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast channel. I hope you really liked this episode. We'll be back with more and more and more.